If you've worked in healthcare or public service for any amount of time, you already know the data. If you watch the news, you've seen the stories about the mental health crisis in America. And if that's not enough, the reports that focus on the crisis amongst our youth are truly heartbreaking. Every 11 minutes in this country, someone dies by suicide. And it's estimated that someone will attempt to take their life every 26 seconds. So, for every one completion, there are about 25 attempts. And the question has to be asked, who are the people that respond to those attempts, those nearly 1.7 million attempts by Americans to take their lives every year? It's first responders, police, and emergency medical personnel. And while you may think the mental health statistics may seem dismal for the general population, they're even worse for providers. PTSD, depression, burnout, and suicide rates amongst healthcare professions, from MDs to EMT basics, is higher than the general population. Paradoxically, the reasons for this are both simple and complex. Complex in the expectations these professionals must deal with, both from themselves and from us as a society, like the expectation that they are to be heroes and therefore can't be human.
Use the analogy of a cake, all the crap goes into this cake, and it's just this cake, and it just keeps getting bigger, bigger, bigger. Now you got this 30-year cake, and over that 30 years, you got a baby you deliver, so you put a little icing on it. You got someone you save from a swift water rescue, some more icing. Now you got this thin layer of icing on this just cake full of crap, and you retire, and now you got to deal with it.
We learned that more than 1 million Americans have now died from the disease, a milestone we didn't want to think about, but knew was coming.
The collective trauma of the pandemic has completely transformed all our lives, putting even more strain on an already fragile healthcare system. COVID has only exacerbated the psychological and physical burden on those who go out every day to be of service to their communities. And while the show of support with banging on pots and pans is heartwarming and sincere, it does little to reduce exhaustion and the quiet second-guessing of what they should have done or could have done during their shift.
We had a lot of nurses who needed the help and didn't really get it. It was a whole thing where they didn't understand what was going on. It was immediate changes. My mom, an ICU nurse, would come home and my dad would lay out a blanket and he'd spray her down with disinfectant. So it really not only put emotional or physical stress on it, it also put emotional stress on our nurses. Just from watching my mom, it put emotional stress on our first responders because people were getting sick. It was just, there was a lot of scared of the unknown. I know that emotionally my mom would come home and it was really hard because families couldn't see the people they loved, and nurses were with a lot of people and their last days. And there's nobody more than you want to see than your family member. And so it did. It put a lot of stress on the community as a whole, but more so the individuals that were at the front of that fire.
Dr. Schoenfeld, 305. Dr. Schoenfeld, 305.
For all of these professionals, many are not just experiencing PTSD, depression, and burnout, but they are confronted with a phenomenon called moral injury. In fact, according to the Scientific American, moral injuries amongst healthcare workers has become its own epidemic. While some of the symptoms may be the same, a moral injury is different from PTSD. Simply put, PTSD has to do with fear and anxiety, while moral injury has to do with guilt and shame.
Not just nursing students, but EMS responders right on the border, are impacted by multicultural challenges for, what's morally right, what's economically feasible, what's politically allowable, what policies have been set up, and then they are trying to navigate just caring for people.
Dealing with this epidemic, along with other prolonged stressors, is already having long-term consequences. Today, many hospitals have had to close entire wings due to staffing shortages. In fact, in rural areas, entire hospitals are being forced to close due to a lack of providers. And there are also other disastrous outcomes, like mistakes due to both physical and mental fatigue, which of course only increases the likelihood of burnout, depression, moral injuries, and the cycle continues. Rinse and repeat. This is a complex and often overwhelming challenge, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. But what you're going to see is our effort to take a small bite out of this rather large elephant. This necessary work began as a resiliency course for returning Iraq and Afghanistan veterans attending college. Resiliency scores have been found to be a better predictor of staying in college and graduating, better than SAT scores and other standardized tests.
There's an actual course that I'm taking that's called the SURF course, and only veterans could be in that course. The course is actually a great resource for veterans transitioning to the civilian world and academic world, because they know that they're going through things that regular college students, they're probably the one to understand what we've gone through. There's a section that deals with helping you fall asleep, get better quality, not quantity of sleep. I used to have to depend on sleeping pills, and after I did that course and section, I actually was able to get off my sleeping pills and just sleep like a normal person.
In the end, it is about a belief in oneself, persistence, and a good social support system. Almost organically, the resiliency course found its way into the fire EMS community.
I was a firefighter, paramedic, and for the city of Mesa. And for the fire department, we knew that in public safety there was a problem with stress-related illness, and reached out to our labor group and just happened to come across Dr. Marks and Dr. Callahan and their research and a program that they were putting together for public safety. They're psychologists kind of getting in our head and trying to make some changes in our head. It wasn't until I actually started putting them in practice where the light bulb went on and said, oh my God, these things actually work.
Because of time constraints and training cycles, a much different approach had to be examined, and we found that we could still get significant changes with a 5 skills training. It's also been modified and integrated into educational programs, recovery programs, and nursing curriculums. The physician, Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, said, "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet." Our belief is that while people cannot change what they will be exposed to in the line of duty, whether in a hospital or the scene of an accident or natural and human disasters, what they can control is the way they think and believe about themselves, other people, and the world. We, in fact, can learn to thrive. In 2018, I was invited to speak at the Southwestern Trauma Conference, where I met Amy Devens and Maria Stiegel, who are part of the Arizona Regional Behavioral Health Authority and Arizona Complete Health.
If you don't prepare people the right way to take care of themselves, they will burn out. It's an opportunity to really get people more prepared for what they're going to encounter and how to really take care of themselves and prepare their families to live through and thrive through their careers.
The Train the Trainer workshop follows the phrase, see one, do one, teach one. Prior to the training, we talk about the need to create a safe place for everyone in the room.
So often our first responders aren't really able to, or they don't feel able to share much about themselves and be vulnerable. They forget that part of being better is actually letting a little bit of yourself shine through. So I think that was probably key, is finding those folks who are willing and able to do that.
We acknowledge that this training may not be for the faint of heart, or for those immersed in a culture that discourages vulnerability. This training can stir things up for people, and we own that up front.
Creating a safe environment to share things, we almost always say, hey, we're using the Vegas rule. What happens in this room stays in this room. We set that expectation that, like, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to model that behavior, and I'm going to share things about myself that I never would have been able to speak about them because I didn't have that perspective yet. We have found that it works best to have two instructors, if you can, with different perspectives, and sometimes it does become intense. So that way you can, if one isn't making, great connections with the room, the other can maybe, or you have the opportunity to really monitor the room. One is presenting and facilitating conversation. The other instructor is really kind of watching for reactions in the room and just monitoring to see how things are going.
All of our trainings are done in small groups, not just to break down barriers, but also to build a sense of cohesion. The first part of the training covers the 5 skills and the format that has evolved through this work.
We have a common thread through all of us, which is a passion for making sure that we save lives. So we'll introduce each of the topics, we'll talk through what those skills mean, we'll give examples from our personal lives, from our experiences. When you're teaching this material, you can customize these slides to your own experiences.
For each skill, people are asked to think about a time in their life where they've used that skill and share with their small group. For example, remember the time you had to give up the belief that life was fair? Or maybe you had a goal and had to overcome challenges and persist to achieve it. Next, people are asked to think of a current challenge in their life where a skill could be useful to them. Finally, participants are asked to think about key words that might help jog their memory about the skill.
Skill that I use that helps me with my well-being and is probably the most challenging to learn, in my opinion, is belief. Because I usually have to take a pause, a time out, and say, okay, what belief system is in play here? What activated me to act in a certain way? How am I feeling right now? And what was that belief system? And can I change that belief system? And can I change that perspective? It's hard to do, but I think it's very impactful when we sit there, take the time, and identify what that belief was and what can change.
What I found in teaching, they almost always gravitate towards belief and trust. Those are the two that are going to be the hard ones for my team. For trust, that one's a tough one. And especially when you have a class where you're trying to teach in a room full of people who already do work together, but they don't necessarily feel like they can be vulnerable with each other. So that becomes a barrier, and it takes a little bit longer to get there. When you have a mixed group of folks from different departments, different industries, to me, I find that they're probably a little bit more apt to share, or if they don't feel like, well, this isn't going to get back to my chief. So I feel a little bit safer in this environment. So creating a safe environment to share things, you deserve to be able to lean on someone else too. It does not make you weak. It makes you a human being.
Confronting and challenging old belief systems can be uncomfortable for all of us, but especially for those who work in a culture that is resistant to change. I also believe that mental health professionals tend to pathologize people's reactions to prolonged stress, which of course only reinforces stereotypes and stigma. After teaching the 5 skills, we take a deeper dive into each one of the skills, using the text A Community of One, Building Social Resilience, and the 8 skills as a template. We begin this part of the training with the question, why? Why do you run into a burning building when others are running away? Why do you go towards the chaos? Mark Twain once observed the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Simon Sinek, in his TED Talk, Getting to Why, explored the importance of knowing the answer to the question why, not just for individuals, but for organizations as well. Inevitably, for public servants and healthcare workers, it's all about service. Our why gives us meaning, impacts our perspective, and molds our beliefs. The call to service is a core value that impacts our belief systems in good ways and in ways that can ultimately be harmful if we don't allow for our humanity. Research has consistently shown that a healthy social support system, one where we both give and receive support, is the best protective factor against the consequences of psychological distress.
Firefighters are really great at not taking care of themselves, not seeking help when they need it, but doing anything they can to help anybody else. Whether it's someone at their station, someone on the street they don't know, someone inside a burning house, they do anything they can except help themselves. They're the last to say, I need help.
I went back to a moment where I responded to a second alarm building fire. I was downtown, Station 1, Tucson fire. I got diverted to a car hit by a train. I got to the street, and there was a lady screaming, little boy, and I felt the back of his head, and I saw the light go out of his eyes. At that moment, this was a 2-year-old. I saw my son who was 3. I saw Tony Gonzalez's son who was 3. I saw every kid imaginable. I mean, I said, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And I went back, put myself out of service, and I didn't think I was ever going to come back to work again. I had a support system, though, that allowed me to talk it through.
First responders and healthcare providers are wonderful at caring for others. Unfortunately, they're less so in caring about themselves. So one of the things we do is pose the question to people, who are you going to call? Who are you going to call when you've run your third PEDS call? Who are you going to call when you've been working 12 to 14-hour shifts in a short-staffed emergency room? Who are you going to call after you've responded to auto accidents, domestic disputes, and an angry public? Who are you going to call when your spouse or partner continues to complain about you being emotionally distant? Who are you going to call? And those people come home to families who also bear part of the burden of their partner's service. Because we know the value of a healthy social support system, when we designed this training, we wanted to include the perspective of family members and devoted 2 hours to this dialogue.
Whenever he goes on a big call that night, he'll come home and I know something's wrong. And it takes upwards of 12 to 48 hours for me to be able to pull out of him what exactly he saw or witnessed. And once he talks, I notice a huge relief off of him, but I feel like he doesn't want to burden me with these stories. By default, we kind of are their therapists, so that can be a little bit difficult to absorb over and over again.
Do you feel that the organizations that you're employed by, or your husband or spouse is employed by, provides resources?
I'm not sure you can have enough support. It's true. It was not acceptable or encouraged to acknowledge that the shit that we see is not normal, and it's totally okay for you to not feel okay with that. I have a friend who is a firefighter, and he's a captain, and he was open with me about going out on this call that involved a kid, and he was having the nightmares and he was struggling, and they did not have a robust behavioral sciences unit where he was at. And, I flat out told him, I said, if you're worried about your guys, you need to be the one to go get help. You need to be the one to reach out and say, hey, it's okay that if you guys are having nightmares about this or struggling with this, let's go together. Let's make a phone call and get somebody into the firehouse. The more that you can normalize that asking for help and talking about it among the spouses and the cops and firefighters themselves, I think that's going to go leaps and bounds.
The courage of these people to be vulnerable and to share their struggles and triumphs makes the 2 hours fly by, and there's never enough time. These are strong people.
Bison, when they're in a herd, they can feel the barometric pressure drop during a storm. They instinctively all turn toward the storm and they charge it. We cannot get through life and not experience life storms. But if we can take a lesson from the buffalo, we can just say, okay, this is my reality. This is what I'm dealing with. I'm going to charge it. I'm going to move head forward. So in our home, we say, be a buffalo.
I recently gave a presentation at a conference for first responders entitled Self-Care is Not a Sin. All of the skills under strengths is about good self-care. And not to be Pollyannish, we also talk about the downside of poor self-care, with the issue of sleep deprivation being one of the largest. Maggie's Law in New Jersey, poor outcomes, irritability, poor memory and concentration problems, family strife are all consequences of poor self-care.
Growing up as a little tiny firefighter and going through the ranks, you see a lot of terrible things. And at first, it was never really broached by the leadership that I had when I first came into the fire service. It was toughen up, you get through it. So we didn't develop a lot of those skills. Fortunately, when it started to open up and there was more female firefighters, they really helped push the idea that, hey, we're all humans here. We do have feelings and we do have to deal with those feelings so we don't self-destruct. And self-care started to become a real thing.
I wanted to make sure our staff, including myself, had the right tools to make sure we were to manage stress. We said, hey, we're going to set a goal every year, and I want you to practice self-care at least 2 to 3 times a week. And then we started to build a database for the folks so they can see what everybody else was doing and say, hey, this person practices yoga for 10 minutes. I like that idea. I want to try to incorporate that into my self-care routine as well. But I also modeled the behavior for the staff. I make sure they saw me take 10, 15, 20 minutes out of my day to practice self-care, and that might have been through exercise. So that not only gave them confidence, but that this can be done, but if our leader is taking the way, we're going to go ahead and follow him and practice that as well.
This is also one of the seeds to change a culture where self-care is valued and encouraged rather than being seen as a sign of weakness.
I really loved the way your class was structured. Helped me realize again how normal it is that all the feelings that we had when we saw that crap that we went through. And so it's normal. And that makes a big difference.
That night, I went back to the hotel. I just could not stop crying. And I called my husband. Pretty sobbing a lot on the phone, and he was just like, I gotta come down there, I gotta help you. Are you okay? What's going on? And I said, I feel wonderful. I'm crying because I finally have the tools I need to process my trauma that I received in the fire service. It was not a check the box. It was a change your life.
While our training acknowledges PTSD, burnout, suicide, and all the rest, we explore how folks can thrive and actually grow from what they experience. Post-traumatic growth is a small but important field.
Most people avoid what looks bad and seek something that it uses past. You are a room full of people. We are a room full of people who seek trauma. We seek the heart attack. We are doing things that the rest of a lot of the public just did not want to do.
There are countless examples of people who've taken their suffering and used it for the greater good. The founder of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers and organizations like Team Rubicon and The Mission Continues come to mind. In my 45 years of working with Vietnam veterans, there are countless men and women who took those experiences and became therapists, police officers, EMTs, ministers, teachers, nurses, careers where they could continue to be of service despite the horrors of war and their reception when they came home. The real question for us is, do I want to be a victim of my experiences or a survivor? In the end, which way we go will depend on our perspective and our beliefs. So you remember Frank talking about I shoulda, coulda, woulda, instead of what his belief changed was I did everything I could. Suddenly, the anxiety, the fear, the guilt, the remorse, all that was gone. Did the event change? No. Thoughts of should have and could have can sometimes lead to growth through lessons learned, but more often they lead to guilt and anxiety. A better question is, what can I learn from this event?
I realized through some of the classes I went to that, what you resist persists. Got a call at a city facility here that there are numerous times a day. And I've had several people that committed suicide at that building. I had a particular patient that they went for meds, for psych meds. And I said, I told this person, it's not going to happen. You got to see your primary care. I can send you in. They're going to do nothing for you. Sweet person, clean apartment. And we leave there. I'm off duty the next day and come back the following shift. I'm at my computer doing the report. We get a call back to the same place. On the way there, the report says this is a call from the 7th floor, saying they saw someone coming down from above. And it turned out it was this person. So get back on the truck, go back to the station, and for years and years, I keep going back to this place until I move to a different station. Then this says, hey, you don't have to go there anymore, so don't. So I quit. I quit driving on that road. I went out of my way not to go down that road. I actually moved there with my therapist. And I stood where this person had laid. I apologized. And then I told my therapist, I said, it's not that I didn't save this person. I couldn't save this person. I realized that what I did was I was just a molecule in her life. I did everything by the book. Alert, oriented, conscious, vitals were great. They wouldn't have done anything for this person, but yet the guilt was there. And finally, I was able to just release it. Just say, okay, you did what you're supposed to do. It's all good, and move forward. And I can go by, I can drive by there now. I can look at the building, and not have a worry or just feel so much better about it.
One of the objectives of this training is to help participants understand that they can learn to thrive and achieve their goal of being of service. In order to thrive, we have to accept our human fallibility. We all make mistakes, and if we're truthful with ourselves, our greatest life lessons come not from our successes, but our mistakes. In fact, if we're honest with ourselves, Mark Twain's observation rings true. Good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. Having that understanding can be invaluable to those starting their careers.
I want to be able to share some of the life lessons that I got wrong, that hopefully somebody else doesn't have to make that same mistake. Hopefully somebody else can learn from the mistake I made. There's plenty of mistakes to go around for everybody, but we don't have to make the same ones. And hopefully you have an opportunity to maybe share that with someone.
My chief asked me, he goes, make a class for these people, tell them what they can expect on the mental health side when they get out there on shift. So I wrote up a class on mental health, told them a few calls that I'd been on, told them how it affected me, and how I wish that someone would have talked to me when I was 21 years old, sitting there saying, look, if something happens, you need some help, or you're not quite understanding how to take this, come talk to me. And if you don't want to talk to me, I'll find someone you can talk to.
One of the hardest skills for public servants and healthcare providers is trusting. During this module, they're asked to recall the person that came to mind when they were considering the question, who you going to call? Undoubtedly, one of the characteristics that they appreciate about them is their ability to empathize.
At the firehouse, you really don't share that much because you're in a group and you want to be strong and remain strong and look strong. We had a call one day where a kid got smashed into a chain link fence by a pickup truck, and I took each person at 1.8 inches individually and said, hey, given the chance, would you not want to go back and wash down the blood and the brains? And they go, well, yeah, given the chance, I don't want to go back. So I called my chief. I said, hey, we're not going to go back for the wash down. And he goes, why? I said, that's a pretty ugly call. I said, the guys don't want to go. I don't want to go. He goes, okay, we'll call dispatch. So I called dispatch. And that was the first time that I empowered myself to help my people.
We use the work of Brene Brown as a focal point about the power of taking the risk to be vulnerable. Aside from the positive personal benefits of trust and empathy, we also explore how trust and empathy can be used as tools in providers' everyday work. Trust and empathy aren't just warm, fuzzy psychological concepts. They have real practical value.
So if you got someone, say, that's really anxious, and you approach them and you kind of increase your respiratory rate and you tighten your body language like they have, and then you start slowly, you start with where they're at and you start changing your breathing rate and your body language. You make a connection with them, and you will see over time, within just a few minutes, they start slowing their breathing and they start patterning after you, and you pull somebody out of like hyperventilation syndrome or a high anxiety state or a resistant, I'm not listening to you state by just kind of closing your arms and kind of starting the conversation and then opening your arms. And instead of leaning back, you're leaning forward. And so you're in a mirroring state with them, and then you are pacing them and you are leading them, and then your speech might have started more rapid, but now it's slowing down and softening and getting quieter. Pretty soon, you've kind of changed the whole dynamics of the situation.
Those in the fire department here can probably agree that it's 200 years of tradition unhampered by change. We're stupid, we're slow to change.
Change is hard for all of us, whether as individuals or organizations or cultures. But change is inevitable, and the healthcare and responder communities are already transforming.
Change is inevitable. It's going to happen whether one likes it or not. Learning the behaviors of resiliency, becoming more resilient myself, and practicing those behaviors and modeling starts impacting that change. So we start at the beginning with the fire academies. We can start with early managers, maybe going through the promotional process and teaching them resiliency. But as they become proficient in learning these skills, they also model these behaviors, and change starts to happen slowly over time, and our culture starts to adjust and adapt.
There are others out there changing a culture that has become trapped by an identity of being a hero.
One of the things I think is interesting about heroes is the modern moral context we have applied to that term. What we're talking about, when we talk about these people who can do these amazing, amazing things, but they're still people. And they are going to make mistakes.
The hero thing, I think I find in my experience after 9/11, the individuals coming into the fire service, not as a whole, you can't generalize, but I saw way too many coming in thinking they were going to be heroes and they didn't want to do the dirty work. I mean, we would get individuals that had fallen out of bed. I remember one individual who defecated all over himself, and the wife had just said, "Oh no, just put him back in bed." And we'll clean him up. No, you don't have to do that. And we didn't have to, but that's what you did. I mean, that's what you did. It's not a glamorous job, but that was the right thing to do. And that's why we got in the fire service to begin with. That's why we became firefighters, to help and make a difference.
There are people like Chief Jan Rader from Huntington, West Virginia, who's not only reduced the opioid deaths in her county by 40%, but created a much happier workforce in the process. She's a true leader in the effort to be sensitive to the mental well-being of her people. One of the surest ways to build a strong cohort is to give them a common mission. The last day of the training, each group teaches a skill and then gets feedback from the larger group.
Self-awareness is a big part of ourselves and changing some values and changing some beliefs. I think it was Henry Ford that said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
How you're giving feedback, that you guys were quite specific in how you gave feedback to each other. And especially, I loved how you're like, oh gosh, I saw this linkage between belief skill and this other skill. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, there was an empathetic, trusting moment that they utilized trust. And so in strength, the first thing he went to was thinking of a belief that tied into strength. And so I love how you're weaving all this together and giving specific feedback.
Went through that program, got hired at Timber, and the first day that I put on this shirt that had my name on, Michael Haas, on a Timber Mesa shirt, that was rewarding as hell. That took 9 years, roughly, in the making to have this shirt and to be part of this family. And without persistence, I never, I could have easily just given up. I could have easily not gotten into the fire service, not gone and dealt with him, not left that and gone to the military hoping that I would be able to get a Timber, right? Like, I had to use persistence. And I also had to trust myself and my people around me who were fighting for me to help me be who I am now, right?
Here is a concrete example of taking risks, being adaptable, and being willing to share your stories. So y'all are just doing it. You've done it. We also hope that this will empower them to take the resilient skills back to their communities.
So when I came back from the resiliency training, I was super excited to share everything that I had learned. I had an education class with our new graduate nurses that are in a residency program, and I used them as the pilot class to test and see how this was going to go. There wasn't one person in there that didn't shed a tear that day. Really opened up. They had a lot of great feedback. We talked about vulnerability. It was really awesome. At the end of the day, they were all exchanging phone numbers and getting together in groups and talking about the things they were struggling with.
I am reminded of the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."